excited for your presentation today. I'm going to start by reading the back of the almanac. Growing luminous. On the mystic path, we create our own light, and at first we struggle. Growing luminous. On the mystic path, we create our own light, and at first we struggle blind and baffled. Seeing nothing, hearing nothing, unable to think, unable to imagine. We seem deserted by dream, vision, or inspiration, and our meditation barren altogether. But let us persist through weeks or months, and sooner or later, that stupor disappears. Our faculties readjust themselves to do the work we will them to do. Never did they do their work so well. The dark caverns of the brain begin to grow luminous. We are creating our own light. George William Russell. Thank you.
Right. Thank you ever so much. Welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle that we take up every Saturday afternoon. And for those of you who are in a different time zone, please recall that we will have a 3-hour difference in time as of next
Saturday.
Does it start on Saturday or Sunday? Actually,
No, it starts tomorrow.
Oh, it starts tomorrow. So, okay. So then it will take place by next Saturday. So those of us who are meeting at 3 p.m. Hawaii time will still keep meeting at 3 p.m. And those of you who are on Pacific time will be now working at 6 p.m. So it's a 3-hour gap now for the whole of the daylight savings time. We are taking up the topic today of harnessing the will. Cliff Tillotson is going to be our presenter, and he's going to speak on the Hindu tradition of the text called the Bhagavad Gita. The art piece that came in your mail was a picture of Krishna on the battlefield with Arjuna, from which this teaching called the Bhagavad Gita was said to have been given. As I remember it, one of Cliff's real heroes, well, for a very, very long time, and already by the time that we were going to college together, was an Irish attorney who was also a mystic and a philosopher and a theosophist. And he translated the Bhagavad Gita into English from Sanskrit, evidently learning Sanskrit during his time off from being a lawyer. And I remember Cliff, as a political science major, taking up the study of Sanskrit, the most difficult class he ever took in college, so that he could read the Bhagavad Gita in its native language. So this is a text that has meant a lot to him for a long time. Many times when we're having conversation about what the right thing to do is in life, Cliff will give me a reference to the Bhagavad Gita. So we're really privileged, I think, to have him speak on this topic today of harnessing the will. Cliff, I hand it over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Renee. Yeah, I think all of us may have a book or something like a book that we go to for spiritual or moral life guidance. It's kind of can be our compass in life. It could be the Bible, the Quran. I'm thinking of the Tao, the Dhammapada. Renee sometimes goes to the Gajil Gibran's The Prophet. Someone just gave me this book by Thich Nhat Hanh, No Mud, No Lotus, but a lot of people go to his writings for that kind of nourishment. And And I've always gone to this little book right here, this particular version of the Bhagavad Gita. It's a very small little book, but I've read many different versions of the Bhagavad Gita, and they all have different emphases. But what I like about this one by William Kwan Judge is it's just so straightforward and practical that it's really accessible to me in terms of trying to figure out how to live my daily life in a good way. And so I've been reading this little book almost nightly for my whole adult life. And it's kind of feels like it's like a well that I go to, and I put my bucket down with a rope into this well. And it feels like after all these decades, I feel like I'm getting deeper into the well. The water is more refreshing and nourishing and pure, I feel, but I've never ever got close to touching the bottom of this well. I can keep going back to it and back to it and back to it. And it always gives me some new insights on how to live my life. And I think Renee maybe chose me to give this talk on the will because I really think that this book, the Bhagavad Gita, is really about understanding and accessing the will. And so that's what we're going to try and share, some ideas from the Bhagavad Gita about the nature of the will. One of my favorite stories that I wanted to start with about the Bhagavad Gita is when our daughter decided to go to India to volunteer at an NGO, a Gandhian NGO in Rajasthan. And I took the chance to just say, "Oh, Sandhya, I would love to take you there. I've never been to India. Can I escort you to India?" And she said, "Sure, you can do that." So I got on a plane in Hawaii and I flew to Newark, New Jersey, and there was a 2-hour layover. And I met Sandhya, and then we jumped on a plane to Mumbai. And everybody on the plane was Indian except Sandhya and I. And Sandhya had the window seat, and I had the aisle seat. And I'm just sitting there in this aisle seat wondering, like, what's India going to be like? I hear some people just can't handle it. It's just too much. It's too intense, too chaotic, too much suffering. And it just messes them up. Whereas other people, maybe who are able to tap into the deep culture there, the religious and philosophical traditions, and just the absolute wonderfulness of the people, the heart quality of so many of the people in India, have a whole different and an uplifting experience. And I was hoping it was going to be the latter for me. And I was sitting there in the aisle seat, just minding my own business. And all of a sudden I feel someone tapping on my right knee. And I look over, and this fellow looked a little bit like Deshaun, was tapping me on the right knee. And I looked over to him, and literally he said nothing, but this is how he started the conversation. He said, "Have you ever read the Bhagavad Gita?" He didn't say his name or anything like that. He just said, "Have you ever read the Bhagavad Gita?" And I go, "Well, yeah, I have. I love that book." And then he goes, and of course I would botch up the accent, but with his head moving sideways and so forth, he goes, "Well, that is not a religious book." And I go, "Oh, I thought that's what it was. I thought it was a religious book." And he goes, "No, it's a science book." And I go, "A science book?" He goes, "Yes, it's about the science of living." And I go, "Oh my gosh, I am going to have a great trip to India." if it starts, we haven't hardly even got in the air and it's already started like that. So it was a magical trip, but I do believe that that's what the Bhagavad Gita is. It's about the science of living a good, a good quality life. It's Krishna's guidance on that. And it's about the will. And so I've been thinking about this idea of the will, and the title, Harnessing the Will. I'm kind of like wondering if that's actually the right way to talk about it, because I think the will, I think this mysterious force that we can use sometimes we can use it in the wrong way, and sometimes we can use it in the right way. It's the same force, I think, but it can do really wonderful things, or it can do really, really terrible things. And so I started wondering about that. And I think you might say that while the energy of the will is one, when it's used properly, you're tapping into it. You're not necessarily harnessing it. You're tapping into it, or you're letting this energy flow through you unobstructed. Whereas when you use this energy for your own self-benefit, you might harness it for that benefit, then that will becomes completely opposite. It becomes inverted, and it can be a real negative force in the world. So I like to think maybe rather than harnessing the will, we let the will harness us. It would be the better way to think about it. If we're talking about that deep spiritual energy that's infused throughout the whole universe. So in thinking about the will, and also just thinking about the times we live in right now, I've been really drawn to the 16th chapter of the Gita, because I've been thinking a lot about trying to live a life of service, how to properly live a life of service. And here in Hawaii, I've been trying to use my skills to address homelessness and alleviate some homelessness here in Hawaii. And I've been kind of surprised that I meet all these different people that are working on this great challenge of reducing homelessness. And for some reason, they seem to fall into two camps. And it's this one group who are super inspiring people that just are just so heartfelt people. And they're like my heroes here in Hawaii, who I've got to know, mostly women, by the way, who are so dedicated to alleviating suffering and so forth. But then there's this other group that maybe a lot of them started out with really wonderful motivations to address homelessness, but somehow that energy got kind of inverted, and it's more like they're more about, I don't know, themselves in some way doing the service than about those that they are serving. And it becomes this real distinct dichotomy of people that I'm seeing in this particular field of service. And this one woman who wrote this book, a Buddhist monk, she wrote this book, Standing on the Edge, and she says that pretty much any virtue can be inverted if you're not careful, empathy or respect or whatever. And it's like, how do we prevent a certain virtue from getting inverted? And a quote that's come to mind for me a lot recently in regards to this is by T.S. Eliot, from one of his poems, where he says, "The last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right thing for the wrong reason." And that seems to be what happens sometimes with people. And then what started out as a good motivation and tapping that will for a good motivation, somehow through an inversion or reflective process, becomes many times its opposite. So this 16th chapter, where the quote in today's discussion comes from, is the title of this chapter is kind of interesting. It's devotion through discriminating between the godlike and the demonic characters or natures. And so the quotes, the qualities of someone that is trying to embody godlike qualities are, and I think this very first one, I always found this very interesting. The very first of these godlike qualities is fearlessness. And I think that fearlessness is essential to being able to tap this more deep spiritual will. But I'll just read these qualities real quick, because I love reading this list because it's really inspiring. Fearlessness, sincerity, assiduity in devotion, generosity, self-restraint, piety, and almsgiving, study, mortification and rectitude, harmlessness, veracity, and freedom from anger, resignation, equanimity, and not speaking of the faults of others, which is very difficult, not speaking of the faults of others, universal compassion, modesty and mildness, patience, power, fortitude and purity, discretion, dignity, unrevengefulness, and freedom from conceit. These are the marks of him whose virtues are of a godlike character. It's quite the list of qualities. But then he goes on to say these other qualities of more what I would call in someone who's using an inverted will are hypocrisy, pride, anger, presumption, harshness of speech, and ignorance. And I read further before coming on today of this chapter, and I'm going, what Krishna is painting here is very much what the political landscape of our world is right now. He says, those who are born with a demoniacal disposition know not the nature of action nor of cessation from action. They know not purity nor right behavior. They possess no truthfulness. They deny that the universe has any truth in it, saying it is not governed by law, declaring that it hath no spirit. They say creatures are produced alone through the union of the sexes, and that all is for enjoyment only. Maintaining this view, their souls being ruined, their minds contracted, with natures perverted, enemies of the world, they are born to destroy. They indulge insatiable desires, are full of hypocrisy, fast fixed in false beliefs through their delusions. They indulge in unlimited reflections, which end only in annihilation, convinced until death that the enjoyment of the objects of their desires is the supreme good. Fast bound by the 100 cords of desire, prone to lust and anger, they seek by injustice and accumulation of wealth for the gratification of their own lusts and appetites. This today hath been acquired by me, and that object of my heart I shall obtain. This wealth I have, and that also shall be mine. This foe have I already slain, and others will I forthwith vanquish. I am the Lord, I am powerful, and I am happy. I am rich and with precedence among men. Where is there another like unto me? I shall make sacrifices, give alms, and enjoy. In this manner do those speak who are deluded, confounded by all manner of desires, entangled in the net of delusion, firmly attached to the gratification of their desires, they descend into hell. Esteeming themselves very highly, self-willed, full of pride, and ever in pursuit of riches, they perform worship with hypocrisy and not even according to ritual, but only for outward show, indulging in pride, selfishness, ostentation, power, lust, and anger. They detest me who am in their bodies and in the bodies of others. And then he goes on to say that the gates of hell are three: desire, anger, and covetousness. So I just read that because it kind of paints to me the global political picture right now. And so what we're dealing with is this, what I think is this inverted will. So it seems to me, even the Bhagavad Gita, it was a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna 5,000 years ago, just on the battlefield of the Kurukshetra battlefield before this great battle. But it's incredibly relevant to us today in terms of trying to discriminate between those that are having more of a gravitational, what I call a centripetal pull toward themselves. They're using the will in a centripetal way versus those that are operating in terms of trying to let the light within oneself, the deeper willpower of the universe come through them and be a channel for that, and not, be kind of self-aggrandizing or what have you in terms of how they live their lives. And it seems in many ways that most human beings, well, I mean, there's a whole spectrum, of course, but most human beings tend to get through humility and determination try and stay in that other side of the line, or can easily slip dangerously into the one camp that Krishna is describing. The Gita was Mahatma Gandhi's go-to book as well. He read the Gita every day, and he especially focused on quoting, reciting to himself these few verses at the beginning of the second chapter of the Gita that has become to be known as the self-governed sage. And he would recite these passages to himself every morning. And I think this section in the Gita in the second chapter is really a lot about the will. At the beginning of it, Arjuna asks Krishna, he says, "What, O Keshava," that's another name for Krishna, "what, O Keshava, is the description of that person, what, O Keshava, is the description who is possessed of wisdom?" I should look it up because I'm having a little trouble with it. Yeah. I'm trying to go, when he uses the word man, he's actually meaning any human being. He's not just meaning man, he means human being, but that's how Judge did it. So it's hard for me to, in my mind, to switch over. So what O Keshava's description of that man is the description of that wise and devoted man who is fixed in contemplation and confirmed in spiritual knowledge. What may such a sage declare? Where may he dwell? Does he move and act like other men or other people? And Krishna does not answer Arjuna's question directly by trying to describe the outer character qualities of a sage. He says this, he says, a human being is said to be confirmed in spiritual knowledge when they forsake every desire which enter into their heart, and of themselves are happy and content in the self and through the self. So there's this nature of desire that can enter into oneself from without. But it makes me also think that there's another form of desire that we can generate or gestate in the heart. And that's often in the Buddhist tradition, the idea of the bodhisattva vow, the desire to benefit others, to help the world. This kind of desire opens up, I think, the gates and allows this more spiritual will to come through. But later in this section on the self-governed sage, Krishna shows how it's such a slippery slope to fall into this other realm where one is using the will in an inverted way for oneself. He says that he who attendeth to the inclination of the senses, when our desire nature allows us to get pulled out of ourselves by our senses, he who attendeth to the inclination of the senses, in them hath a concern. From this concern is created passion, from passion, anger, from anger is produced delusion, and from delusion, a loss of memory. From the loss of memory, loss of discrimination, and from loss of discrimination, loss of all. That once we lose discrimination between what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false, we are in a state of absolute confusion, and that's when the will is completely inverted. But then Krishna goes on to say, but he who free from attachment or repulsion for objects, experience them through the senses, we can experience the objects of the senses, through the senses and organs, with his heart obedient to his will. He's saying that we have to find a way to make our heart obedient to this higher spiritual will, attains to tranquility of thought. And this tranquil state attained, therefrom shall soon result a separation from all troubles. And his mind being thus at ease, fixed upon one object, it embraceth wisdom from all sides. So the teaching, I think the safeguard teaching of the Bhagavad Gita to protect ourselves from falling into this darker realm is the renunciation of the fruits of action. This is a teaching in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna shares with Arjuna numerous times throughout the Gita, is that for us to be safe from getting trapped by the ego, by our desire nature, we need, before we engage in any kind of action, especially an action that may benefit ourselves, is to renounce all the fruits of that action before we engage in it. And this is a way of kind of shielding ourselves from allowing this energy that can flow through us, which is the power of the will, from becoming inverted, and then we lose our way on our spiritual path. So I'd just like to end with this wonderful quote by Robert Crosby, who was a disciple of William Quan Judge, who wrote this Bhagavad Gita. And he says that, this is in the almanac for this week, Robert Crosby says, "The spiritual will cannot act so long as there is any selfishness in the action or the desire for its results." The idea of renunciation of fruits of action. So those are just some thoughts from the Gita on the nature of the will and harnessing or tapping into it, spiritual will.
Thank you so much, Cliff. That's very clear. Somebody like to offer a question or comment? We do have probably attached to your initial invitation all of the quotes for this week from the Still and Moving Center Almanac. So that can also be of assistance, I think, in looking at this topic. But perhaps something came up while Cliff was talking that you want to bring up.
I didn't want to scare you with that talk. I hope I didn't do that.
That was amazing, Cliff. Thank you for that. I really enjoy your talks. I was just thinking about at the very beginning of the presentation, you mentioned about fear in relation to harnessing the will. I was wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about that. Trying to understand it a little deeper, like the relationship and how you look at it from the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita.
Well, I guess I've been thinking about this nature of fear recently just because of what's going on in our country, that so many people are living in fear. A good friend of mine that I just visited over in California, he has 5 members of his family who have been picked up by ICE, and without any warning, all they could do is make one phone call, and they've all been deported to Mexico. And they were all legal here in the United States, and yet for one reason or another, they've all been deported. And being with this friend of mine for 10 days, we went over to get some pieces of equipment. He was talking to all his family members, and he has quite an extended family, Hispanic family, and they were all living in fear of what's the consequences. And his sister was saying nobody's in Costco in Oxnard, California anymore, and everybody's hiding out. And I've noticed that a number of people that have been drawn into, say, the orbit of the current administration aren't being drawn in because they like what's going on. They're being drawn in because of fear, like Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. They don't really necessarily approve of what's going on with the current administration, but they're afraid of the consequences of not aligning themselves. And I think this fear is like this, I don't know, disease or something that can spread through a whole, sector of humanity. I think this is what allowed, the Third Reich to come into being, is this ability to scare people, to intimidate people, and to threaten people. And it doesn't even have to be external. When I was going to get this piece of equipment, we were traveling from California to Kansas. Kansas and back. And we were staying at hotels, and when I was there, I was seeing the maids, that work in the hotels. And I was thinking, every one of those maids who maybe isn't legal is living in fear, and not necessarily a fear of ICE so much as fear is of their fellow workers who might turn them in. You know, you may upset one of your fellow workers and they would call ICE on you or something like that. So this terrible shadow of fear can grip, you know, our minds and our hearts. But I've always been fascinated by that, why Krishna started that list of godlike qualities with fearlessness. You know, so Bob knows the answer. Thank goodness.
No, not at all. The opposite. But when you were talking about fear, one of my favorite parts of the Bhagavad Gita, it's a different section where Arjuna throws down his sword and says, I don't want to do this. You know, and it turned out that the fighting was actually between two sides of his family. And so he had close relatives on both sides. It was like a civil war, brother against brother kind of thing. And he said, I don't want to do that. And it was, I think, motivated by that sense of fear that you're talking about. I'm afraid to kill people. I don't want to kill people. I don't want to be part of this whole negative energy that essentially is war. And Krishna draws him up and says, you fool, you are a warrior. That is your class. That is the type of person you are. Your character is one that needs to bring forth this energy. And who do you think is dying? Who really dies? You know, the people you kill, the soul is immortal. And he goes into this whole thing of a religious thing and totally flips the energy around. And to me, that's the beautiful part of the Bhagavad Gita, is as you're talking so elegantly about will, to have the kind of character that can will action without consequence, without hatred. I mean, it's clear that Krishna is saying, you are not killing people because you hate them. You are not killing people to win the war. You know, there's another energy that's very subtle here that he's talking about. And it's an energy that is part of the immortal will, the immortal soul. And when you talked about Gandhi, it doesn't surprise me that Gandhi went to the Sermon on the Mount and the New Testament and the Bhagavad Gita. Satyagira, the energy of the soul force. That's what I think Krishna was telling Arjuna. Your soul force is the focus. And that is the antinomy, the opposite of fear. It's something else. So I was just struck by all of that as you were talking, and the question about fear as a possible focal point. I think that's the beautiful part of the Bhagavad Gita. And I think you're right about the harnessing the will. I think that comes from Plato, where you're harnessing the will and you're harnessing the appetites, and reason draws back both of them, controls both of them. And it's really, reason is the only energy that counts. And that is not what the Bhagavad Gita or the Buddha was talking about. So I wanted to share that, but it's not the answer necessarily.
No, thank you. That's really wonderful thoughts, Bob.
Shane?
I had some thoughts. Cliff, first of all, thank you for sharing wonderful stories and your thoughts around Bhagavad Gita. I'm always fascinated to hear stories of people visiting India and having their first experiences or first moment of joy that they get. And it's interesting through the stories that you mention of one thing that I caught my attention as you were saying was how you are able to go deep within the well every single day in the bottom of the well, and with that intention of trying to touch the bottom of the well. What does that signify to you? And that also reminded me of like the water philosophy from the Taoism, where the water be like a water where you are able to go to the places where none of the things can even reach, because water is one of the things that can actually go to those places. It can serve to those places without being attached, because it is so pure, so soft as yielding, that it can go and serve things which people can only think about. And the other aspect of how you were sharing about the two camps of society, sometimes they have good intention, but they have a layer of identity, of ego, that I want to serve. It is me serving in this way, as opposed to allowing the energy to serve itself. And one of the most crucial aspect is about self-embodiment. Are you giving things that you have? Most of the time we find ourselves trying to give things to others which we don't have. And that's I think you can't give away things which you don't have. And one thing I find it interesting as part of also Bhagavad Gita is Arjuna is one of those warriors who have done the self-embodiment work for many years. It is not that Krishna chose to be with him in the last moment of the war, but it was through the whole journey, right from the beginning, about the virtues, the qualities he had harnessed, the sacrifices he had done for sake of himself, for his family, for community, the time he spent with his guru. There were a lot of things were at play, which ended up being as a way, as a source energy to allow Arjuna to act through that energy and help fulfill that cosmic dance which was at play, which is, again, it is beyond our comprehension. There's always a greater energy at play. But what can we do as human beings? How can we ensure that that we are on that energy path where we try to dissolve every single impurity that we may have? And I found that fascinating of what you said is renouncing every fruit that you may get out of it. Now, one thing is about that I kind of learn is when your actions are pure, you perform and do it without expecting anything in return. That is the most purest form of action or love or wisdom you can give. So I was curious also to hear on that part. What does renouncing fruits you mean in your perspective in some actions?
Yeah, I was thinking about that a little bit in relation to what Shioni's asking about fearlessness too, and also what Bob was saying about Arjuna and his, at first, having all these doubts about getting in the war. But one of the teachings of Krishna is to be indifferent to blame or praise. But if we're able to do actions just because deep down in our heart we know it's the right thing to do, it's our kulyana, is what we say here in Hawaii. It's our dharma, they say in India. It's our duty. We just know. There's a wonderful quote by H.P. Blavatsky that the work at hand has the abstract claim of duty. If we focus on the action that's right in front of us and we do it with the highest motivation, the highest, purest motivation, with no external expectation or no external reference for whether this action is good or bad. And I think that's where Arjuna was trapped in his despondency and doubt was, what will everybody think if I go kill all my relatives and all my teachers? This is not what I should be doing. But Krishna is saying, no, the only reference that's true is the reference inside you, knowing that you're doing what your dharma is, what your duty is. And that becomes an unshakable pillar that one can stand with. So if one's being attacked or one's being, elevated with praise, it absolutely means nothing to one, nothing at all. It's only the question, did I, in my heart of hearts, do what I was supposed to do in that particular situation? And if we can do that, that is a powerful, it's a powerful experience to have that knowledge that in that particular context, with that particular person, or in that particular situation, to the best of one's ability, one did the cleanest, the purest action one could. And there's a fulfillment in that. That's different than a fruit of the action. It's just a knowledge that me and this human being in this particular alignment with all these other factors and all these other things, I did my best. And there's a warm self-satisfaction in that that's different than trying to get a fruit of one's action by some external quality. And I think that's allowable. That's okay without blowing up one's ego. Diana, did you have it? Oh, I thought I saw your hand go up.
One of the things that came to my mind in regard to fearlessness, and it was something that Mahatma Gandhi definitely exemplified, was this willingness, and that has to do with the will, doesn't it? A willingness to give up just about everything in terms of, like all material possessions. He had about 12 things. He had his glasses and his walking stick and his sandals and his loincloth and a spinning wheel and his Bhagavad Gita. That's about everything he could fit. Went onto a little mat about that big. So you couldn't take anything away from him. You couldn't threaten him and make him fearful of the loss of any objects because he had none. And yet he wasn't absolutist about this with anybody else. Like one of his disciples came to him and said, "Oh, but Gandhiji, I just love my library." And he said, "Well, keep your library, enjoy your books, use your books to, bring them as much wisdom as you can to yourself and others, until you're ready to give them up." So one of his quotes was renounce and then enjoy. So he said, at least be willing to give them up. I don't think that he said everybody had to give everything up and live a life of absolute poverty. Although those who lived in his ashram took vows that were close to living, I think, on the edge. But even if you don't live that way, like you may have a different set of duties that may call upon you to have more material means. That might be part of what your role is in a particular lifetime. And yet to be willing to give anything up. And part of that thing that we have to be willing to give up is anything connected with our body. We have to be willing to give up our lives. Anything connected with our ego, we have to give up our pride. Any kind of crystallized conception of ourselves and who we are and what we are. To really be fearless, it seems like we're being taught to be willing to give all of those up. And then we are more invulnerable. Then we can tap into that higher will. As long as we're afraid that we have something to lose, we're much more vulnerable, and we don't have that same access to our will that we might otherwise have. Diana?
Cliff, thank you so much. That was an amazing talk, considering that everything's going on in the world. And to feel like it was 5,000 years ago and we're still having that same dichotomy, and that it was so well put, and trying to understand the nature of the different sides and where it's coming from and what's happening. That was the most complete understanding of that I've heard with all the stuff that's going on. So thank you so much. And for me, what struck me was, with everything going on, I had been praying and asking and listening deeply of what's my action. And it's hard to know, it's like when you just said, if we're being called, my action may not be going to the Washington DC and standing in a crowd. That's not my action. But it's like, how do I respond to all that is happening in the world, and the suffering and the fear? And how do I what am I being called to do? What is God's will asking me to do in this life? And I think that you made some really important distinctions of really trusting that we don't know, and that if we listen deeply and pray and read, and then we will know. And there's almost like a knowing, this is what I need to do, versus I should do this because I should do this. And instead of a should, it's a really comes from inside. So I really thank you. It was really important for me to hear this today. And because there is so much fear and anger and junk in the world. And so it's like feeling like we have a way to go forward with this idea of the will working through us, and really trusting that how do we have fearlessness to trust that we're going to be guided and shown what we're supposed to do, or what impact. Maybe it's just with a grocery store person, but maybe it is writing letters and giving money, but it can also be in so many different ways that we can be supportive and be able to listen. So thank you. It was just amazing, Cliff. I really, really appreciated it. Thank you.
Marianne, I noticed your head nodding while Diana was talking. Something about today inspire you?
Yeah, I thank you. Diana, that was a good accolade to understanding what Cliff brought forth, and the urgency and this concise presentation of that was very helpful for me. I am getting on a plane to go to India, and I'm wondering whether I need to carry the Bhagavad Gita with me, or if someone will hand it to me while I'm in 44A,
Yeah.
And what struck me is the renunciation part of it, honestly. It's a confusing time to be there, but I just am drawn to go now and be there, and walk in the footsteps of Gandhi and the deities, and some part of my Western mind says, well, I have to explain why I'm going there, or I need to take a yoga class just so people can understand why I'm going. And then the other part of me is like, no, I don't. I just need to let it flow with me. And you helped me kind of explain it to my soul, why I'm called to do that and be there at this time. And I also want to pack and prepare, but I also have a lot of letters to write to my congressmen and senators, and so I just want to balance it. And so I think you gave me a real good perspective of what to do, how much to do, and how to be mindful of going with a clear heart. So I really appreciate that. I mean, it was a very helpful presentation for that.
Oh.
Carolyn, do I see your hand up?
Yes. The thing I don't understand is why there's such a big, all-pervasive war. Does that have to happen? It just seems kind of hopeless that we could reduce the level of the war, and I associate also that with the persistence of these bad guys. They seem to be able to keep themselves in power and get nastier and nastier. So, Cliff, can you give any perspective on is it inevitable that such a big, awful war would have to be fought by Krishna and whoever helps them?
Gosh, I don't think it's inevitable. Even in the Mahabharata, I mean, Krishna was striving so hard to avoid the war, and there was a lot of opportunities to avoid the war, and they just weren't taken until it got to the point where, you know, why does a war ever have to happen? But it seemed like it became inevitable finally. And it really was boiled down to just a couple of characters who were just terrible that got everybody else, you know, kind of to align with them, mainly out of fear. But it was mainly Duryodhana was the really bad guy, and some others that supported him, that eventually, yeah, that war became inevitable. And it would be nice to figure out a way, you know, after 5,000, I mean, we've had so many wars in this world, you know, to find a way to avoid that, and how these characters seem to get in positions of power. And I think, yeah, going back to Diana's point, it's like, what can we do? Well, first we have to witness and try and understand how these forces work, but then we need to not be moved from without, but somehow be that kind of pillar of truth, that pillar of fearlessness in our own lives. You know, we need to be able to stand strong in ourselves and not look for any kind of externals to prop us up, and be that kind of, that force, that clear force of spiritual will, ideally, an independent spiritual will, and not allow ourselves to get sucked up. And maybe others will take notice of that. But for some reason, it just seems like large numbers of people tend to be morally, mentally, and spiritually passive. And when we allow ourselves to become passive, we allow ourselves to be manipulated. And that's the thing, that once we get ourselves into that kind of a state, we can be moved mainly by fear to just follow the line, you know, and not cause waves or whatever. But it would be nice if we could figure out a way to not let these bad guys get in positions of power and cause all this havoc. Margaret?
This isn't really addressing how we get rid of the bad guys outside of us. But part of my understanding of the Bhagavad Gita was Arjuna's war with the bad guys of greed, jealousy, hatred, all of these different characters that he needed to slay that were his relatives, was actually an internal battle with the greed, hatred, all these things that are in all of us, that we need to slay those. So I've heard it said, it's important for us when we go forth with an action to not have all those enemies in us, our own personal greed, hatred, disgust, all that sort of thing. So that's one point, that's our battles, internal battles. The other is that where you talk about renouncing the fruits, renounce is I find an interesting word. But I'm familiar with the concept of do the best you can and let go of the results. It's not that the results are bad and you have to denounce them, but you do the best you can and you let go. I think sort of the same thing, but that's just something that came to mind also. And as to renunciation, again, I think it has to do with, you can have $1 million, but the key is not being attached. Like Renee was saying, be willing to let it go. It seems like attachment to outcomes, attachment to whatever is what stirs the pot of negativity. Anyway, those were just some thoughts that I had about some of the things that have been brought forward today, which I think is great. Thank you so much. So much.
I think it's true, Margaret, that the whole Gita, the Mahabharata can be taken metaphorically. It's historically did happen, but I think that's it. All these forces are in us, and we have to be able to recognize them in ourselves, you know. That's true.
So that we don't externalize the good guys and the bad guys.
No, the good guys and bad guys are all inside of us.
Shane.
Thank you, Cliff. Really appreciate your presentation, and I really appreciate your humbleness of being a perpetual learner in the perpetual well. And I think that it was just perfect that you presented on the Bhagavad Gita today. I really love what you said about being the self-governing sage, and how each of us can be that self-govern ourselves if we still our mind and be that witness, be that observer, and be that observer to see from all sides, so that we can make our heart obedient to the will. So I will definitely be contemplating on that. I appreciate what Renee said and you said about renunciation. And Deshane and I were just talking about this earlier today. And this quote kind of floated up to the top. True renunciation is in the mind and is neither achieved by physical renunciation nor impeded by the lack of it. Sow the spiritual seed in your heart and leave it to shape the outer life as it grows. And I think it's this talk about renunciation of the fruits or the outcome or physical or appreciating it before you're ready to let it go. It is a very good virtue. Last thing I would like to share is one quote from Taoist philosophy that kind of helps me stand fearless in these type of environments that you had spoke about, is and stand in my own peace. Is in the Tao it says, the bad man is a good man's job. A good man is a bad man's teacher. All things have their place in the grand design.
I like that. That's cool. That's really cool.
I wanted to, could I just say, I
Okay.
like that sharing, Deshane, but I also think Carolyn's statement about why do we have to keep going through this is the factor that is a little unnerving.
Yeah.
I am reminded ever and ever again throughout my life by a quote by Pema Chodron. Nothing ever ends until it teaches us what we need to learn. So why do we have to go through this? Because we haven't yet learned what we need to learn from living here together on this earth. I'm going to thank you, everybody. I'm going to let you know about next week's topic, which is steadying the heart. Our speaker will be Maurice Bishop. I haven't learned yet from what tradition on what tradition he plans to speak, but he is always somebody who speaks from the heart and really does have that kind of deep oceanic calm in the heart. So I think he'll be a wonderful speaker for us. And is there somebody who would like to give a vote of thanks to Cliff today for his really marvelous presentation? Mom, Nancy Ocker, could you unmute?
I would really like to personally thank you, Cliff. I think it helps me better understand you and how you're able to accomplish some things that I admire so much about you. So I thank you for that chance to know you a little bit better and why you are able to do what you do. So thank you.
That was a wonderful little ending there, Mom. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful contributions, questions, and comments. And yeah, Jade, sorry to have not realized which of the names on the screen one is going to speak next. So this is Jade. Put your hand up, Jade. And her husband is Deshane next to her. Thank you, everybody, so much. Look forward to seeing you next week or in the near future. Happy travels, Mariange.
Mariange, I was going to say, if you're still there, I have a number of these books. If you're in, are you in Hawaii or where are you?
I'm in California.
Oh, shucks. I'd give you one. It's a nice travel companion. It's very small. I'm not trying to proselytize, but it's very small. It'll fit in your carry-on.
I'm gonna look in my stocks. I believe that there's something hiding in there. So thank you so much. It's very kind of you. It'll
Have a
help.
lovely trip to India. I'm sure it's going to be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll try and join you from there if I can. If not, when I return.
That's
Okay.
great.
Okay. Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, Cliff. Bye, everyone.
Michael, great to have you join us. We will have this on a on YouTube, and you'll be able to listen to the talk itself in the future if you'd like to hear it. It really was a marvelous talk. You can probably tell from the spin-off conversation.
I got the time difference wrong again.
Oh, okay. You're in California now. Well, as of next week, it will be at 6 p.m. California time because of you guys going into daylight savings. So next week you'll be on time. And there will be a really wonderful speaker on steadying the heart. I think you'll enjoy Maurice Bishop. Thank you so much. Aloha.